Hi, my name is Hana, and I'm presenting our work on the usability of consent interfaces on behalf of my co-authors. Interfaces like this have probably become very familiar to you when browsing on websites. A common reaction is to dismiss the interface as quickly as possible, suggesting that these interfaces have usability problems. These seemingly ubiquitous interfaces are used to meet regulatory notice and choice requirements. However, prior work has found that dark patterns, which steer users towards less privacy protective options, are prevalent, violating the intent of these regulations. It's also important to note that consent interfaces are commonly implemented through one of 5 consent management platforms, which has somewhat standardized their design. While the continued use of consent notices is not the ideal usable solution to capturing user consent, until other mechanisms gain traction, we can at least explore how to make them better. We conducted a 2-phase usability evaluation of consent interfaces. First, we inspected around 200 cookie consent interfaces from 5 CMPs, which identified key design parameters or ways that these interfaces could differ from one another. We explored the usability impact of these parameters through a user study in which we tested 12 design variants with users to evaluate their impact on 6 usability factors. It was first important to consider what usability means for the context of consent interfaces. We developed a comprehensive definition of usability by reviewing 6 existing definitions in the HCI and privacy literature. We noticed that there was a lot of overlap in these definitions and identified 7 factors of usability that are important to consider for the privacy choice context. These were whether the choice interface meets user needs, the ability and effort required to use the choice interface, awareness of the interface and available choices, comprehension of choices, user sentiments towards the interface, their ability to reverse or change their decisions, as well as the presence of darker nudging patterns. The first phase of our evaluation focused on identifying design parameters that may be implementing dark patterns. We first compiled a diverse set of websites with CMP implemented consent interfaces and identified dark pattern heuristics from prior work. Next, we manually inspected around 200 of these websites using a standardized procedure. This helped us to identify 7 design parameters that we wanted to incorporate into our user study. These included the prominence of the consent interface, the path leading to options for different cookie categories, whether choices were framed in a way that would make people afraid that they were losing something, the readability of the consent notice, the text within button options, the format of the cookie options interface that's linked from the initial consent interface, as well as the process for changing a consent decision. We designed a between subjects experiment in which participants were exposed to a design variant. Our baseline variant, which we called best practices, incorporated what we hypothesized would be the most privacy protective or usable option for each parameter explored. Specifically, it was a fully blocking design, which made other parts of the website inaccessible and included options for cookie categories in the initial screen. The notice text was formatted in bullets, and the button text detailed actions performed by the buttons. It led to a version of the cookie preferences interface where all options for cookie categories were on the same page, and it noted that users could change their decision through a persistent cookie preferences button. 10 conditions differed from best practices in one regard. We also tested a worst practices variant to explore the combination of the least privacy protective or usable design options explored. It was implemented as a banner, which didn't block users from other parts of the website. Options to cookie categories were embedded within the text, and it led to a multi-layer cookie preferences that had options for different categories and different tabs. It included loss aversion text that warned users that their experience may be affected if optional cookies were not accepted. The text of the notice was formatted in a paragraph. The button text did not specify an action, and decision reversal was not mentioned. We tested our design variants with over 1,300 prolific participants. Participants were assigned a shopping task on our website prototype. They were exposed to one of 12 of our consent interface designs. They then answered survey questions based on what they remembered from their experience. And after reviewing the consent interface, they were asked more survey questions. Median completion time for the study was around 16 minutes, and participants were compensated $5. We analyzed interactions with the website prototype and survey responses from about 1,100 participants. In summary, we observed that some of the design parameters we explored had significant impact on one or more usability aspects, while others did not have much impact. This included participants' reported consent decisions. Each bar in this graph represents one of our design variants. And while changes to the paragraph or button text didn't have much impact, participants were more likely to consent to all cookies and conditions without inline options. We also found that non-blocking interfaces led many to skip making a consent decision. Looking at the prominence of the consent interface, we found that the absence of a fully blocking or banner notice led to poor awareness. No participants in this condition where the consent interface with the cookie preferences button interacted with the button at all during the test. Compared to those in best practices, participants were significantly less aware that there was a privacy decision on the website and were less aware of available cookie options. Related to user sentiment, we found that the absence of inline options and the initial screen of the interface led to lower investment in decision-making. Participants in this condition, where options were available through a link embedded in the text, were more likely to report choosing the easiest option and not at all carefully compared to those in best practices. We also found that the standard cookie categories, which we drew from the ICC UK cookie guide, caused confusion. Less than half of participants selected the correct definition for performance cookies, and only 16% selected the correct definition for functional cookies. While the cookie preferences button wasn't effective as an initial consent interface, we did find that it enabled people to change their consent decision. 82% of those in best practices said that they would use that button to change their decision, while only 45% of participants instructed to visit the cookie policy said that they do so. And we didn't find a significant impact by removing the reversal instruction text, suggesting that the button on its own is effective. As I suggested at the beginning of this presentation, consent notices as they exist pose a burden beyond their poor usability. There's a considerable cost to reading cookie consent interfaces, comprehending available options, and making a decision for each website a person uses. Browser-based consent management mechanisms, including browser extensions, which automatically communicate users' preferences, have the potential to alleviate some of the burden. However, until these mechanisms become widely adopted, it remains important to improve the usability of existing schemes.